Among the roster for BlazBlue Central Fiction is a buffet of creative character design. From a character that has multi-directional wind manipulation that alters her moveset in very different ways, to a character that centers his mobility around the different ways he can throw and fly around on a chain, to a character that uses both science and magic to make fireballs, lasers, control gravity, use teleportation, summon black holes, and more. Among this roster is Hibiki Kohaku, a character that is, comparatively, pretty dull. His own neat little gimmick is shadow clothes, but they don't do anything particularly interesting, apart from the very occasional fake out. Unless you like shadow clones, dual wielding, or Attack on Titan, it is hard to see the appeal in playing such a character when the rest of the roster is so cool and unique. Hibiki is boring. At a glance, it's hard to disagree. He isn't flashy, he doesn't allow you to do anything that anybody else isn't already doing, and his game plan pretty much never changes. However, beneath the surface, I don't think this character is boring at all. In fact, I think he is one of the most enjoyable characters among this cast of clever, unique designs. Let me explain. Why do you play fighting games? And I don't mean why did you start, I mean why do you still play fighting games? Why do you stick around? How did you even find this channel, to be honest? See, I'm willing to bet that for the majority of you, you stick around and continue to play fighting games because improving and eventually beating other people is fun. Outplaying other people is fun, and it feels good. Fighting games aren't exactly chess, but there is most certainly a mental battle occurring between two players in a match, and this is where you find most of the fun. Okay, back to BlazBlue. Would you believe me if I said Hibiki was the epitome of this? Here's a little more information on Hibiki. Hibiki has 2 cross-up special moves, a very fast overhead, and a special move that will hit either high or low depending on the player's choice. This all sounds pretty strong until you realize that the cross-ups are very reactable and unsafe, the very fast overhead is only a threat when he has 50 meter, and the high-low special move mix-up can be entirely avoided by just jumping and blocking, which you have a lot of time to react and do. Basically, much like a Strife character, he'll only pull out the crazy shit when his meter's half full. That means that most of the time, Hibiki will open up opponents by observing and preying on their defensive habits. And it's at this point in writing this video that I stop and say to myself, Daz, isn't that just fighting games in general? Doesn't everyone have to read their opponents to open them up? Stop being pretentious, this is basic stuff. Well, I'd be right in saying that almost everyone has to do this in some capacity in a fighting game, but let's try and keep it to BlazBlue for now. I'm not pulling shit out of thin air, I promise. The difference between other characters opening people up and Hibiki opening people up are 3 things. How they interact with system mechanics, how pressure oriented they are, and how reactable their mix-up is. First, let me get this one out of the way, how pressure oriented they are. Characters like Mu, Amane, Lambda, and some others have notably weaker pressure than Hibiki does. Why? Because they have alternative means to winning a match. If they fail to open someone up, they can resort to doing something else, like dominating neutral. Hibiki is relying on his pressure to open people up, because it's all he has. Don't bring these characters that do other things up in the comments. Next, how reactable their mix-up is. A lot of these characters in BlazBlue are doing very hard to react to high-low mix-up. These characters are interesting, sure, but it's in a different area of the game, and that area is very often resource management. Hibiki doesn't have to manage any resources, but during pressure he does have to pay more attention to the opponent's defensive options than, say, when I play Relius, see them block one thing and just start busting out high-low 50-50s. The last and most important difference between Hibiki's pressure and many other characters is how he interacts with system mechanics. This is where I think the point I'm trying to make stands out the most. Hibiki is slightly more susceptible to system mechanics than most characters. Don't believe me? Look at Dustloop Wiki, it's always right 100% of the time, I swear. Barrier and instant block become real threats against Hibiki, whereas they can seem rather negligible against a lot of other characters in the cast. As a super quick explanation, barrier block is this gauge you can use while blocking to push your opponent further out while you are blocking them. If you instant block while using barrier block, they get pushed out even harder. Hibiki just happens to get pushed out really hard because of the way his pressure works, so it's something he must keep in mind, but of course there is counterplay. It is actually because of BlazBlue's system mechanics that Hibiki becomes interesting. As a factor he must work around, Hibiki is made interesting by what is essentially a character flaw. He is a boring character thrown into a game full of interesting system mechanics and unique characters with unique options that he must always be coming up with new solutions for, and it is because he has to that he does. On the other hand, I'm not really going to be thinking up new solutions for most of my opponents with a character like Izanami, when I can just put the Oki down, put the ribcage up, float near the ground and begin the high-low onslaught. Figuring out how to open each individual opponent up with this straightforward character is where the interesting gameplay lies, but that doesn't translate so well to spectators. To digress a little, have you ever heard of Haikyuu, that volleyball sports anime? Well worth a watch, but I bring it up because as I rewatched it with a friend, a scene stuck out to me.
Give the ball to me! I'll stop their run right here and now! When I send the ball to Bokuto, and he's a bit too overzealous, A, he lands it like normal. Or B, he misses or gets stuffed, and that increases the chance for his spirits to get completely crushed. Then he's no good to us. Or C, he doesn't get a set at all, which means he gets all pouty, and that's pretty annoying. Here, Bokuto! Triple block! Bring it!
What we essentially saw and usually see in volleyball was just a set and a spike. But what made the scene interesting is the thought process we were shown behind his decision making. It's similar with Hibiki. Moments can seem really basic, but the interesting part is the decision making that leads to that moment. For example, take a look at this clip. Are they gonna burst? No, they wanna hold on to OD, I can tell. They wanna OD, overdrive during block stun, and try and command grab me, I can feel it. They wanna see a committal button. Like that? Yep! It's standard stuff, not particularly interesting. However, let's look again, but this time I'll break down the clip and explain every factor that remained present in my mind while playing. So the part we're focusing on begins here. Before I even press a single button, there are multiple factors I took into account. How much health do I have? How much health does my opponent have? How much meter do I have? How much meter does my opponent have? Do I have burst/overdrive? Does my opponent have burst/overdrive? So before I do anything, I recognize that we're both on low health, and for me that means that the next time I'm hit, I could lose the match, especially if they disable my burst. Therefore, although I'm the one with the advantage here, I need to be very careful with taking any risks in my pressure because one mistake will cost me. However, they are also low on health and they're in a position of disadvantage. Since we both have all of our resources, I make a reasonable assumption that my opponent will spend a resource to try and escape pressure, because they also can't afford to take another hit. Now, it's a matter of pinpointing what that defensive option may be. My opponent can spend 50 meter on a reversal, and on top of that, has another 50 meter to make it reasonably safe if it gets baited. Wait until they block something and use a dead angle to push me off of them. Use overdrive to gain some invulnerability and either punish me or take their turn while I recover from a button. This is what I narrowed it down to, because even though there are other options like just blocking, mashing or backdashing, the ones I listed are more likely because of how low their health is. So, out of the 3 options, I assumed it would be overdrive because this is the safest option. Unlike the other options, it can't be punished. Even if it gets baited, Izanami can do yet another reversal and cover it entirely with her overdrive, because this game is balanced. After evaluating all of that, I go ahead with my pressure and focus on using fast normals, expecting my opponent to overdrive. With these fast moves, if my opponent uses overdrive, I'll at least remain safe. However, I quickly notice a problem. They're not going into overdrive. I want to bait it, but they refuse to use it. But I'm still confident that that is the option they want to use. What can I do? I quickly realized it's likely that they're not going into overdrive after blocking just any move anymore, because we've been playing this set for an entire hour beforehand where they kept getting punished for doing exactly that. So what are they waiting for? They're probably looking for a move with more recovery, or as I said, a committal button. It's a risk. Using something slow at all means leaving a gap where they could mash on me or do a reversal super or anything along those lines. I could just die. The usual dilemma that now occurs here is, to open up my opponent as Hibiki, is the option I'm choosing for a reward actually worth the risk? There's no right or wrong answer, it's just about how you choose to engage with risk-reward. Evidently, I sound pretty comfortable choosing the option I did, so I didn't really mind the risk. I'm still confident my opponent is looking to use overdrive, so I take the risk and throw out a more committal button. My opponent sees it, sees a move worth using overdrive on, but the problem for them is that I wanted them to see it all along. Usually Hibiki players leave themselves wide open after that move, which is why it's a commitment, but I was prepared and jumped to safety before I could be punished for it, while also wasting their burst. Now, I resume my pressure again, but this time I've played my cards right and successfully removed their strongest defensive option. And I end the clip there. That analysis was of 6 seconds of gameplay. When I play Hibiki, I'm doing this all the time. Just in my head in a matter of a second because the human brain is so amazing. I love this stuff, and most other characters in BlazBlue don't push me to do this like Hibiki does. That's where the interest lies and why I find him so fun, despite him being such a plain character. But like I said, it all takes place in my mind between me and my opponent. A spectator doesn't get to see any of that. And it's not like you can ask a player to verbally explain their thought process and decision making in the middle of a match. That's what I think will just remain an unfortunate truth. Unless you particularly like this character's aesthetic, he'll be relatively uninteresting to watch unless you take it upon yourself as a spectator to really get into the mind of the player and try to guess the reasoning behind their decision making. Though even then, you can only assume the reasonings, and it's not quite satisfying when you can never know for sure if you were right. This can be extended to other fighting games as well. Funnily enough, despite playing these games for over a decade, only through Hibiki did I gain an appreciation for the quotation marks simpler characters. Similar accusations have been levied against characters like Kai in Guilty Gear, but once again, he is interesting to me because a fundamentals character like him is subject to the interesting and complex mechanics of a game like Guilty Gear, so they reflect on Kai by asking him to engage with it more than some other characters would, which results in an interesting and surprisingly unique challenge that Kai players must deal with. Usually at this part of the video, I'd think up and offer some ways for you to find more enjoyment out of spectating these characters, but I won't. I think the video is best suited to end here. More importantly, I just want you to have heard my perspective and take it into consideration when you see people playing a boring character. I'm sure most of the time we're just memeing about it, but if you genuinely wanted to understand where the appeal of playing them is, well, this was my answer. Thank you for watching, and thank you to anyone that liked, commented on, or subscribed to me over the course of any of my previous releases. Have a wonderful day.